So today we're talking about communicating courteously and effectively via email. Why is this important? In a world where electronic communication capabilities are almost constantly at our fingertips, sometimes we take that access for granted and forget that communication is an art form. We no longer live in the world of Emily Post, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should leave her in the dust. Sure, a lot of her guidelines seem outdated and dusty at this point, but an awareness of how our words are interpreted by others has never been more important, now that the bulk of our communications don't have the benefit of contextual clues like tone or facial expression. As the ability to send communications rapidly expands beyond anything Emily Post might have been able to imagine, it's more important than ever to consider our manners. Of course, increased communication capabilities and ease of access aren't the only factors in this equation. Accompanying them is a rather marked blurring of boundaries between our personal and professional lives. How many of you have sent work emails while you're at home or off the clock? Probably everyone in the room and everyone online too. How many of you check your email as soon as you wake up in the morning? Probably when you're groggy and a little bit crabby if you're anything like me. And you probably don't send out the most personable responses. Our world is growing increasingly casual. I don't think that's inherently a bad thing, but I do think it means we have to make more of an effort to consider our words and actions in the workplace. Communication skills are particularly important for lawyers. According to this 2016 Illinois ARDC annual report, 71% of client grievances arise out of a breakdown in attorney-client relations. Furthermore, when lawyers get sued, the leading cause is again communication. So clearly it's something you need to think about, but what exactly are your responsibilities? From the Illinois Rules of Professional Conduct, a lawyer shall reasonably consult with the client about the means by which the client's objectives are to be accomplished, keep the client reasonably informed about the status of the matter, and promptly comply with reasonable requests for information. What does this all actually mean on a practical level, though? Reasonable is a pretty vague term. There are a handful of things you can do to make sure you're living up to the rules of conduct. First of all, make sure that your client is content with electronic communication. There are still individuals who, believe it or not, prefer to communicate over the phone or even via snail mail. For new clients, communication preference is something you can easily establish on an intake form by asking, "How would you like to receive documents?" Consider the amount of time it takes you to respond to an email or phone call. Immediate responses aren't always going to be possible, but set a time frame that works for you and is reasonable. Whatever your rule might be, communicate this to your clients early on so that they know what to expect. Also communicate to your client your standards of delegation, which is going to be different in every office. You're probably not going to handle every bit of client communication if you have an assistant or paralegal on your staff. Be sure your client knows who handles what and who they should contact for different needs. And they won't always do that, but you can at least redirect them accordingly, or they won't be surprised when someone else responds. Once you've set these 3 standards of communication, outline and reiterate them in your client engagement letter. If you have this letter and stick to what it says, throughout the course of your work with the client, you cover yourself to some extent from formal complaints. With all that being said, clients aren't the only people you communicate with throughout the course of a day. You also need to practice good and polite communication skills with your staff, opposing counsel, and other legal professionals you encounter on a daily basis. So let's go over some more general skills to consider that might seem like common sense, but aren't when you get down to it sometimes. Don't mix your law practice emails with personal emails. That's step 1. There are a lot of reasons this is a good idea. First of all, record keeping becomes a lot easier with a separate work email. Having a separate email address for work may help you reduce junk email or spam at work. When you commingle private emails with professional, you're more likely to miss an important client or associate email. It keeps your personal information private, but above all else, it's simply just more professional. Attention spans are shorter when communication takes place electronically, and you always have to keep that in mind when you're emailing. Especially, I imagine that's probably true as you go down the line of younger people. The younger you are, the shorter your attention span is probably going to be, although that's probably not necessarily true. Don't forget this when sending emails, though. If you really need to go into detail about something, pick up the phone. Don't be scared of the phone. If you have to stick to email, though, make sure that you get to your main point quickly. It's like right at top. You can elaborate below, but the important point needs to be addressed quickly in the email. Don't send mass emails unless you absolutely have to, with the exception of firm newsletters or campaigns. A change of address can be a good situation where a mass email is acceptable, but do it correctly and don't expose client information. By and large, though, these are typically avoidable and should be avoided. So there are two platforms that are really good for sending mass emails that you should just do instead of using emails, and that's MailChimp and Constant Contact. And there's a link, MailChimp. It's like chimp is in the animal. Their logo is a little chimp, and I think he salutes you when you send mail. It's really cute. But there's a link in your materials to a video called Plan and Execute an Email Marketing Campaign with Constant Contact from a previous how-to that we did. And we'll be doing a seminar in April about using MailChimp to help with the same thing and distinguishing between marketing campaigns and newsletters. The rise of the internet and smartphones has given the perception that professionals are on call 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, and 7 days a week. You don't have to succumb to that pressure, but you do have to be clear about your hours. If you don't respond to email on Sundays or after a certain time of day, tell your client that in their engagement letter. Generally, though, your default should be to respond to client emails, even if it's just to acknowledge that you received it. If you find yourself generating the same receipt of message response over and over, you can set up a quick step in Outlook. If you're in a rush, a quick "let me get back to you" message can suffice. It prevents the client from feeling neglected or unheard, but it buys you time to respond more adequately. Don't forget to utilize out-of-office alerts if you're on vacation or incommunicado for a day, and state when you'll return and get back to them more quickly once you do. You don't have to be at the mercy of your smartphone every day, but you do have to be communicative about boundaries or breaks in your communication capability. There are also directions in your materials to set up a quick step in Outlook that you can make a quick step so that if you're busy, you have an email that is already drafted and it'll send automatically you just have to click a button and it'll send to a client and it'll CC your assistant or paralegal. But those directions are in your materials. And there's also directions about setting up better automatic replies in Outlook. Outlook has a new feature, or relatively new, that allows you to set different out-of-office responses based on where the email is coming from. So if it's like inside your organization, it's one email. If it's outside, it's another one. And it also allows you to set the beginning and end date, which is really cool. In my personal experience, one of the aspects of communication lawyers struggle with the most is tone. Lawyers communicate in a very specific way that can be off-putting or even come across as rude to the uninitiated. You don't have to change the way you write entirely, but a few small warm words peppered in can really make a difference in how your message is perceived. Kindly find attached or with warm regards are good options that can take you far. This can come into play particularly when directing staff. Please is still a magic word. You don't have to sacrifice personality for formality's sake, but I do recommend avoiding sarcasm. It rarely carries well via written communication, and the risk of misinterpretation is often just too great. Always consider cultural differences as well, especially if you work on a global scale. Humor is not universal. I used to work as a patent paralegal at a pretty large firm, and so I had to send emails back and forth with other paralegals all over the world, and the emails were almost exclusively like, "Hello, here's this, goodbye," because it was just too much to try and get into humor or anything like that. In a professional setting, it's best to leave the emojis behind. You have more leeway with staff or peers, but more formal communication, opt out. Compensate for tone in other ways, like the warm language we talked about. One exception here, though, is if you're using an intra-office chat, like Skype or Slack. I think it's fine then, when it's a little less formal. I think emojis are fine. Because there are a lot of stereotypes about lawyers floating around in the world, you have to play defense here. Don't just assume your tone will be taken the way you intend. In fact, it's probably best to assume the opposite. It's an uphill battle, but it will ultimately make you a better communicator. As my grandfather got older, he started typing exclusively in all caps. He was also a lawyer. He did it because he couldn't see, but we had to say, like, Grandpa, that means you're yelling. You're just constantly angry. He did it because it was easier to see, but don't do it in a professional setting, even if you are yelling. It's generally a good idea to avoid. It's rarely something that you want to convey. Don't forward unless it's absolutely imperative for the added recipient to see the message. Unnecessary forwards do nothing but create clutter in your inbox, which you don't want. Stick to clean, classic fonts and colors in your emails. It's fine to like bold key points or like a meeting time or date or location, but leave neon colors or crazy fonts behind. Your email's default is probably fine, but Arials, New Times Roman, or serifs are usually safe font types. Professionalism is something to be stressed, particularly for young lawyers who have probably come of age in a more relaxed world of communication. This might be the first time in their lives that they're having to communicate in a more professional way, so it'll take more of a conscientious effort at the beginning of their career. So be patient as they adjust. Let's talk about structure of emails a little bit. Your subject line has the potential to be really, really useful and helpful. It not only cues the recipient into what they're about to read, but it makes your inbox more manageable. If you need to scan your inbox for a particular email, an informative subject line will save you some time, because if it's got a keyword in it, it'll pop right up when you search it. A good subject line will get the recipient's mind in gear for the information they're about to read, and will convey the urgency of the communication where applicable. However, balance is important. You want it to convey all that, but also be fairly short, which is not always easy. Keep in mind that when an email pops up on someone's phone, they only see the first handful of words in the subject line. Make the most of those words so that you keep their attention and they don't just disregard it. For example, if you're working on a case with your recurring client, Walmart, the subject line, Walmart case, isn't going to do much for you. Matter numbers can be helpful if they mean anything to your client. If they don't, you can always just stick them on at the end so that they're there for you to search later, but your client doesn't get totally thrown off by them. Or you can mention something specific about the case. Be sure to lead with a due date or an action item, though. You want to write out your subject line and title case, meaning the first letter of most words are capitalized. All capital letters is, again, too aggressive, and all lowercase letters is too informal. If it's urgent, you can indicate that by typing urgent at the beginning or mark it as high priority. Lastly, keep an eye on how your subject line evolves as the thread continues. If you reply to an email, RE will pop up. If you forward an email, FW will pop up. Sometimes, depending on your email provider, these tags build on each other, so you get a subject line that begins with like RE, RE, FW, RE, and that's really annoying. Nobody needs that. So you can just edit it manually and reduce it to whatever it is, the most recent email, whether it's a reply or a forward. Similarly, if you need to send an email to someone, don't just automatically go to the last email communication you had with them and reply to it. That's rude, and you don't want everything in one thread. You want to space it out based on subject. It'll drive people crazy, and it keeps things more organized for you. So the salutation. Unless you're familiar with the person you're emailing and are 100% confident in their gender identity and pronoun preference, use a gender-neutral salutation in your email. This is particularly helpful when gender-neutral names come into play. I once went to a job interview, and I had been emailing someone named Brooke the whole time leading up to the interview, and I assumed it was a woman. And when a man walked down the stairs and said, "Hey, Ann," I was shocked. I was like, oh my God. And I went through my email, and luckily I had avoided any faux pas by just not using gendered language. It's really avoidable. A simple hello, hi, or dear are among the most effective salutations in terms of responses that they generate. If you don't know the person's gender, a simple hi, John Smith will do just fine. When typing out the body of your email, your main concern should be getting to your point quickly. Attention spans are not what they used to be, like we talked about, so keep that in mind. You can use bullets or numbered points to keep things brief if that helps. You can elaborate below if you feel it's absolutely necessary, but it's best to aim for a 5-sentence length when possible. It won't always be possible, but it's a good target to keep in mind. That would be a dream if all emails were just 5 sentences long. It seems obvious, but saying please and thank you in an email will still take you far. One study by Boomerang used messages from mailing list archives of over 20 different online communities and found that emails that closed with a variation of thank you got significantly more responses than emails ending with other popular closings. Closing with an expression of gratitude correlated with a whopping 36% relative increase in average response rate compared to signing off any other way, which is really significant. That's huge. And it's such an easy thing to do. A similar 2010 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that recipients of an email were more than twice as likely to offer assistance when they received an email that included the words thank you in the closing. The study also found that sign-offs like regards had low response rates, and best was among the worst common email closings, which is a surprise because I think that is used really often professionally. Finally, use a signature block. You want to include your full name, title, company name, and preferably logo, and all of your contact information, including your email. Even though if you're emailing someone, you would assume that they have your email. It's good to just reiterate it. Be sure to include your phone number here so that people know how to reach you if email isn't cutting it. There are few things more embarrassing than writing please find attached in an email only to realize that you didn't attach the attachment before hitting send. I have done that many times and it is always embarrassing. Certain email hosts will automatically check this for you. I think Gmail does it automatically. Not always, but I think pretty consistently you get a little notification that says like, looks like you forgot to attach something. There's a software called SendGuard that you can buy for Outlook that will keep this from happening. But in the meantime, triple check everything that you send. Always explain what you're attaching and why it's there. And try to send as few attachments as possible. An email with 10 attachments is a pain for the recipient. Try combining them into a single PDF with bookmarks. Or if you use an online cloud storage service like Google Drive or Box or Dropbox, just send a link instead. This may seem obvious, but you would be amazed by the number of horror stories you hear about emails accidentally being sent to entire firms or just the wrong person. A lot of these offenders are surprisingly young, people who've grown up with the internet in their lives for their entire lives for the most part, presumably people for whom these issues would be relatively second nature, and you wouldn't think that they would be the ones doing this. In 2003, a summer associate at Skadden Arps in New York replied to an email from his friend, proudly boasting about how little work he was doing and how lavishly he was being pampered by the attorneys at the firm, which was probably true based on how summer associates are treated, but it's not something that you want to email to everyone. Unbeknownst to him, he sent it to the email to the firm's entire underwriting group. Within 2 minutes, the hiring department was tasking him with sending out an apology email to the 40 or so attorneys who had been CC'd. And if you Google this guy's name, it's the first thing that pops up, even though he's been a lawyer now for like 10 years. The New Yorker wrote about it. The story was pretty well known. There are significantly more outlandish examples of this that I won't get into, but the point stands: pay attention to who is attached to your email. When sending email, in regards to the actual email address that you're sending it to, the biggest risk is exposing client confidentiality. Email tends to autofill when you start typing someone's name. Always be sure you have the correct email address and are sending the email to the person you intend to receive it. When I first started here, I had known my boss before, and so I had her personal email, and I would regularly send her work email to that email by accident just because it would autofill. So just pay attention. I mean, that wasn't a huge deal, but pay attention. It could be disastrous. You don't want to send confidential details about a case to the wrong person. You'd be amazed by how frequently that happens. Carbon copy, or CC. With the exception of assistants and paralegals, people for whom this is a necessary part of their job, CCing someone on an email is not an efficient way to keep them in the loop. A newly added CC recipient has to read through the entire email thread to try to figure out why they were included on it, which is not an efficient use of someone's time. Beyond that, they may never figure out the specific piece of information you wanted them to know in the first place. There are two solutions to this particular issue. Either copy and paste what you want them to know and send it in a new email, or briefly address the new recipient at the top of the email before CCing them and point out whatever piece of information you want them to see. Adding email addresses last when drafting an email lowers the potential for silly mistakes that you might make. It's always a good idea to finalize everything on your email and then throw in the email addresses so you don't actually accidentally click send or something. Blind carbon copy is a little different. It's a way to send an informational copy of a message to recipients without the folks in the to and CC lines knowing. This isn't automatically visible in Outlook. To access it, open a blank new message and click the Options tab in the ribbon, click BCC, and the BCC field will now be on for all new messages. It does have a lot of uses. If you're sending out a mass email with a change of address, for example, it's a good way to protect people's information. Though again, Constant Contact and MailChimp are better tools for that. Perhaps an employee has BCC'd you on an email to another coworker in order to reveal something to you, like a late project or a missed deadline or someone not carrying their weight. If you reply to this email and you hit reply all, your response will go out to everyone included on the email, including the BCC'd person. This can be a violation of trust, as the original sender will be outed as having included you in the first place. Generally speaking, BCCing is okay where there are over 30 recipients on a message. A message like that probably doesn't need to be overly personalized anyways, so you won't seem sneaky. Otherwise, it tends to come off as nefarious. Like a three-way call in which someone listens and you don't know the third person's on there. It's surprisingly easy, especially on a mobile device, to hit reply or reply all without thinking about which one you're actually selecting. I've done this plenty of times, hit reply when I meant to include all recipients on the thread. I meant to do reply all. Luckily, that mistake is fairly benign. You just have to spend time getting everyone back on the thread if necessary. The more dangerous scenario is when you only mean to send a message to a select number of individuals on a thread and you select reply all. If your intention is to only email a select number of recipients, there's probably a reason for this. It's important to remember that if you are BCC'd on an email and you hit reply all, your response will go to all recipients. You'll be outed as having been BCC'd in the first place, which circles back to that trust violation we talked about. Before you send an email, always check it over. Make this review a habit. Check that you have the correct recipients and email contacts and that you didn't select the wrong reply level. Make sure those contacts are in the correct fields and check that your email is structured well. There's a greeting, a well-organized body, and a closing. Check for spelling and grammar that might get your email providers check settings. Check for clarity and review for tone to make sure you don't come across as curt or rude. If this is a habit that you're having a hard time forming, there are ways to kind of train yourself. Outlined in your materials, again, there are steps in Outlook that you can follow to create a rule that holds outbound email in an outbox for like however long you want it to hold it before it sends it. So you can set it for like, I don't know the upper maximum, but you can set it for 1 minute, 2 minutes, I think probably all the way up to an hour, so that you can go back and review it if you need to, or if it occurs to you that you've made some big mistake, you can go back and change it. In Gmail, you can undo send is the best option there. That's a button that you can turn on in your settings, but it only holds it for 30 seconds, which isn't very long. You have to be kind of quick on your feet to realize your mistakes. In Android, it's 5 seconds, which is even less. So good luck there. I don't think I've ever realized a mistake that quickly. Yeah.
What was the first option you mentioned in terms of delay?
Yeah, you can set up a rule in Outlook. And in the materials that I sent out, there's a more detailed outline that you can follow. But I don't have it written out here, but you can create a rule so that the email is held in an outbox for like X amount of time so that you can go back and review it. For the online audience, he just asked me to repeat the point about the Outlook setting that holds your email. And we do have an online question. So online, somebody asked, are you suggesting that recipients can find out who is BCC'd? So the way they can't, it's not, you wouldn't be able to do that when you initially, just because you've received an email. What would happen in that scenario is that somebody who was on the email hits reply all, and it goes to everyone. You would have to do some detective work and some mistakes would have to be made, but you could potentially be revealed as having BCC'd someone. All right, so an email won't cut it. Always remember there are other options beyond email. You can video chat using Skype or Google Hangouts, or you can simply pick up the phone. Be sure to include your phone number in your signature block so that's accessible to anyone you email. When looping in several parties, GoToMeeting or comparable providers like Join.me, which is what we use for our webcasts, can be a good option. Just make sure your Wi-Fi connection is strong and always test audio and video before using it with clients or colleagues. You want to make sure that things are actually working before you're under pressure to actually make it go. Doodle is a great platform to figure out meeting times with people so that you can just avoid having an email thread of like, when are you free? Google Forms is another good option to avoid excess emails. When emotions need to be seen or read, Skype or FaceTime are really good options. FaceTime for Mac users, it's the equivalent of Skype, essentially. Do we have any questions in the room from anybody? Any unanswered issues? No? We have another online question. So instead of BCC or CC, how about forward with an explanation of why you are forwarding? I think that's a really good idea. Just to touch back, I think you could CC in that scenario, or if you don't want to have to like repeat to everyone why you're doing this, forward is a good option. I would just say watch that issue of the email tags building at the beginning, so the RE, FW, FW. But yeah, I think that is a good workaround. And then we had another email regarding BCC. If you are BCC'd in a named group and you reply all, the reply will go to the sender as well as all the others BCC'd. Yes, that is correct. So reply all really does mean reply all. It's everyone, even the people that you can't see. All right, I think that covers it. If there are more questions, you can feel free to email me. I will follow up with you all, so you'll have my email, although you should already. It's just ahaag@chicagobar.org. Thank you.